Around her the party continued. Her soon-to-be ex-husband stood across the room with his arm around another woman in a red dress. The woman who had been the reason for so many late nights and broken promises. Thomas had insisted they finalize everything tonight, and Sarah had agreed because she was tired of fighting. What no one in that room knew was that Sarah Mitchell was worth more than all of them combined. Her grandmother had left her a fortune when Sarah was just 23, and Sarah had spent the last 30 years quietly building it into something extraordinary. She had never told Thomas about the money. She had wanted to be loved for who she was and not for what she had. Sarah signed the last page and set down the pen. She folded the papers carefully and placed them in the envelope Thomas had provided. Then she stood and walked across the room with quiet dignity. She handed the envelope to Thomas without a word, and their eyes met for just a moment. She saw confusion there and perhaps a flicker of regret, but it was too late for that now. She left the party without saying goodbye to anyone and stepped out into the cold December night. The air was crisp and clean, and it felt like freedom. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in her attorney's office going over the final details. Thomas had taken half of what he thought they owned. The modest house and the savings account and the small retirement fund. He had no idea about the investment accounts or the properties or the charitable foundation that bore her grandmother's name. Her attorney looked at her with kind eyes. "Are you certain you don't want to contest this?" he asked. "You could have protected so much more." Sarah shook her head gently. "Let him have what he thinks matters," she said. "I have everything I need." And she did. For the first time in years, Sarah felt light. She had spent so long pretending to be someone smaller than she was, and now she could finally breathe. That spring, Sarah started showing up at the local community center. She had always wanted to volunteer, but Thomas had complained that it took time away from him. Now her time was her own, and she spent it teaching art classes to seniors and helping organize the food bank. It was there that she met Eleanor and Frank. They were a couple in their 70s who came every week to help sort donations. Eleanor had a warm smile, and Frank told terrible jokes that somehow made everyone laugh anyway. "You have good hands," Eleanor said one afternoon as she watched Sarah arrange flowers for the center's lobby. "Patient hands. That's rare these days." Sarah smiled. "My grandmother taught me. She said that taking time with beautiful things teaches you to take time with beautiful moments." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Your grandmother sounds like she was wise." "She was," Sarah said softly. "She taught me that real wealth isn't what you have but what you give." Over the following months, Sarah became part of the fabric of that community center. She started a scholarship fund for local students, though she did it anonymously. She paid off medical bills for families in crisis and left the money in unmarked envelopes. She helped keep the center's doors open when funding ran short. One afternoon in late summer, Sarah was leaving the center when she saw Thomas across the parking lot. He looked older somehow and tired. The woman in the red dress was nowhere to be seen. He walked over hesitantly. "Sarah," he said, "I heard you've been volunteering here." "I have," she said simply. "I wanted to tell you something," Thomas continued, and his voice was uncertain. "Melissa left me. Turns out she was only interested in what she thought I had. The money from our settlement is almost gone. She spent most of it before she left." Sarah felt a pang of something. Not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. Just sadness for time wasted and lessons learned too late. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said, and she meant it. Thomas looked at her strangely. "You seem different." "Happy." "I am happy," Sarah said. "I'm finally living the life I was meant to live." He nodded slowly. "I heard you've been helping a lot of people around here." The center director mentioned a mysterious donor. "I didn't realize you had that kind of money." Sarah smiled gently. "You never asked about my life before we met. You never wondered where I came from or what mattered to me. You only saw what you wanted to see." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I think I made a terrible mistake," he said finally. "You made the choice you needed to make," Sarah replied. "And so did I. I wish you well, Thomas. I really do." She walked to her car and drove away, and she felt only peace. The holidays came around again, and this time Sarah hosted a Christmas party at the community center. She invited everyone who had become part of her new life. Eleanor and Frank were there, and dozens of others whose lives she had quietly touched. As Sarah looked around the room at all the smiling faces, she thought about that night a year ago when she had signed those papers in tears. She had felt so small then and so defeated. But that moment had been the beginning of something beautiful. Eleanor came over and took her hand. "Thank you for all you do here, dear. You've made such a difference in so many lives." "You've all made a difference in mine," Sarah said truthfully. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Frank pulled Sarah aside. "I have a confession to make," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "Eleanor and I figured out you're the anonymous donor. We've been around long enough to put two and two together." Sarah started to protest, but Frank held up his hand. "Your secret's safe with us. But I wanted to tell you something. Real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the number of lives you touch and the love you give freely. You're the richest person I know." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but they were good tears this time. "Thank you," she whispered. As she drove home that night through streets lined with Christmas lights, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of her marriage ending had felt unbearable at the time, but it had led her to this moment. To this life of purpose and meaning. She had learned that you can't hold on to people who don't want to stay, and that sometimes the greatest gift is letting go. She had learned that kindness is never wasted, and that love given freely always finds its way back to you. Her grandmother had once told her that we don't really own anything in this life. We're just caretakers for a little while. The only thing that lasts is the love we share and the lives we touch along the way. Sarah understood that now in a way she never had before. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the modest home she had chosen for herself. It was nothing like the mansion she could afford, but it was enough. It was hers. And she was happy. Truly happy. The next morning Sarah woke early and made coffee. She sat by the window watching the sunrise and planning her day. There was a family at the center struggling with their rent, and she would take care of that quietly. There were art supplies needed for the children's program. There was always something to do and someone to help. Her phone rang and it was Eleanor. "Good morning, dear. Frank and I were wondering if you'd like to join us for breakfast. There's someone we'd like you to meet. Our son just moved back to town and we think you two might enjoy each other's company." Sarah smiled. "I'd love that," she said. As she got ready, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different than she had a year ago. There was light in her eyes and peace in her expression. She had found her way home to herself. And that was worth more than all the money in the world.